Thank you.
Okay, we're recording, Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Investment Committee. First of all, to say that Councillor Peter Fox, who normally chairs the meeting, sends his apologies, so I'm chairing the meeting this afternoon. We have other members in attendance: Councillor Phil Murphy, Councillor Dimitri Petruni, and I think we also have, I missed it off my screen at the moment, but we can have Councillor Howarth as well with us, and I think we might be expecting Councillor Jez Becker in shortly, but we'll start the meeting anyway. As I say, apologies from Councillor Fox. Have we any declarations of interest to make at this time? I don't see any hands up, so please, if you feel you have to make a declaration of interest, do so both verbally and in writing later on. So we move first of all to the first item, or the third item I should say, on the agenda. That's to confirm the minutes of the last meeting, and those meetings are attached to our agenda today. I don't intend to read through them. I'm sure members will have had the opportunity of doing so. So are there any comments on the minutes for accuracy? No. In that case, I will take it that we accept the minutes as stated. So to move on from the minutes, the next item on the agenda is annual performance reflection. And I think you probably will have seen an email coming in with a late report. So apologies for the late report. There was a slip up there, but the annual performance reflection is to go to the audit committee tomorrow. So we need to just consider it first of all with us today. And I assume that this will be introduced by Deb Hill-Howells. Is that right, Deb?
It is, yes.
Would you like to come in then?
Thank you, Councillor Greenland. And again, my apologies in terms of the report and the late arrival to members. It was prepared, but inadvertently not actually sent out. So in terms of this report, you may recall that last year we did our first annual reflection in terms of the performance of the investment committee. That is a requirement of the asset investment policy, and it's something that we will need to do and continue to do on an annual basis. The format of this report is set out in exactly the same way as it was last year, so you should be familiar with it. And what I will do is just take you through the pertinent points of that report as set out, and it should give us a reflection on what has happened in this very eventful last 12 months. So in terms of the background and why we are sitting here today and why we manage our assets, you will recall when the asset management strategy was refreshed in 2018, an asset investment policy was created off the back of that. And that gave authority to borrow through prudential borrowing up to £50 million to actually incur expenditure to acquire assets for income purposes, income generation purposes. The target return for any asset that we seek to acquire needs to be 2% above borrowing net performance, and we are seeking to realise a 7% return on all assets on an annual basis. In February 2019, that investment policy was widened to include commercial loans, development or refurbishment of our existing holdings, or equity and debenture interests. When we undertook the first review and the reflections in this committee last year, we made recommendations into audit committee for improvements on performance. And in the report, you will see a table which sets out those recommendations that were agreed by audit committee and where we are in terms of actually actioning and delivering those recommendations. So in terms of the policy itself, it was agreed that we needed to review that, and we did that. That was approved by Council in 2020, in December of last year. In terms of the terms of reference for this investment committee, again, that was attached to the policy that was approved in December. And the main changes to that was setting out the quorum, enabling deputies to attend with voting rights, introducing the requirement for officers and any representatives or professionals that are on our behalf attending, advisors would also need to declare a declaration of interest. The investment committee annual review will continue to take place, and that we would also introduce a responsibility when looking to acquire investments to consider the environmental impact of any investments that we were seeking to acquire. So that has all been revised, included within the terms of reference, so that action is completed. Performance reviews are ongoing. This is the second one. In terms of risk assessments, there was a requirement that we would actually prepare risk assessments. That is done. Rather than an encompassing risk assessment, because of the different nature of our investments, we have instead prepared risk assessments for both Castlegate and NLP, and they are presented to investment committee on a regular basis rather than a biannual. We've updated the constitution that went through in March, and that actually reflects now investment committee within the constitution. Performance dashboard, we were asked to prepare that biannually. You will be aware, as a result of the pandemic, that we have been providing far more regular updates to investment committee on performance. And there will be another update later on in this meeting. We also agreed in audit committee, and for the benefit of investment committee members, that going forward, any propositions or proposals that were brought forward to us that we chose not to progress with, that we would actually present those into investment committee so that members again were aware of the type of interest that we were exploring and the reasons why we chose not to progress with investments. That was done, and that was presented into investment committee back in November. There was a requirement to implement the estates restructure, which was seeking to achieve additional capacity. We have progressed as far as we can with that, but we are still struggling to recruit, but we are working on that at the moment. Introduce a sinking fund, and that was agreed and is now in place. We agreed that we would, going forward, make sure that members were updated in terms of legislation changes or consultation proposals. And in this report, there are some additional items. I know we've been doing that throughout the year, but there are some additional information that we'd like to share with you later on. We were also asked to consider a new investment advisor. As you will recall, investment committee changed its policy position in terms of investments going forward. So we no longer are looking for investments unless they are grant funded or they meet policy ambitions within Monmouthshire. So we have taken the decision at this moment in time not to appoint an investment advisor. And should we seek to progress with a proposal, then we will look to do that on a case-by-case basis as is necessary. The other thing that we agreed to do would be to assess the training needs of members, and that is a action that we still need to progress, and that will be an action that will be undertaken on an annual basis, and that is a reflection from members on investment committee to actually consider, given the nature of the investments that we are considering and managing and the risks associated with that, and the changing landscape in terms of policy legislation, whether there are any gaps in knowledge base that it would be useful for officers or external advisors or consultants to come in and provide just some training and depth of knowledge. So that is something that we do need to do. And the last action was the adequate consideration of the climate emergency, which we've now incorporated within our business planning and any investment proposals that we bring forward. So in terms of the actual review in the report on the investments that we currently have, and they are in terms of property portfolio, they are Castlegate and Newport Leisure Park. I've set out a table in the report, which I hope members will find helpful, which actually gives you the position at the time of acquisition and the position as we stand today. So in terms of Castlegate, the return on investment at the time was 3.76%. Currently, it's 3.57%, and that is a reflection of a slight change in the occupancy levels, and we are still meeting the income target on Castlegate, as in the 209,000 above borrowing return. In terms of Newport Leisure Park, and there has been a significant change in NLP because of the current pandemic. So at the time of acquisition, the ROI was 2.11%. We're now on 1.02%. Occupancy at the time of acquisition was 100%, and we're now down at 97%. And that is a result of a CVA and the loss of the Frankie and Benny's tenant. And the net income target is £400,000. Now, in terms of Castlegate, this year we have been substantially supported with the Welsh Government and the Hardship Fund, and we've been able to recover lost income. So in terms of our ability to realise the 400,000 target, we've been able to achieve that. In terms of Castlegate, we have not needed any support from the COVID Hardship Fund, and we've continued to actually trade positively with Castlegate. In NLP, just as further background, as you'll see set out in the report, not only have we lost Frankie and Benny's, there's also been a CVA that has been undertaken on behalf of Pizza Hut, which has directly impacted us. There was also an administration of another tenant, Right Leisure, but we have subsequently undertaken an assignment to a new occupier of that unit. So the 1.02 rent roll reflects those CVAs. It reflects a fall in rent roll, which is the consequences of the CVAs and the assignment. And it also reflects some of the tenant changes that we've also had. So that's the why, and I could go into more detail if required, but we will be doing that in more detail in the performance report later on in terms of why the return on investment has reduced on NLP. I then move on in the report to talk about changes in terms of legislation and consultation. So you'll see I've set out some changes around the Prudential and Treasury Management Codes. I know that Pete Davis will talk to this if you need to talk in further detail, but you will be aware that you've just approved as a council in March 21 the Treasury Policy and Strategy. So you will have discussed that in council. I think one of the biggest changes that we need to be aware of is the PWLB, the Public Works Loan Board, declared in November 20 that you will no longer be able to lend for the purposes of buying assets primarily for yield. So whilst that has no immediate impact on us, because as I've just mentioned, we've changed our revised investment policy, so there's only grant aided or meets policy objectives, it may well impact in the future. The other changes are consultations around the Prudential Code and the Treasury Management Code, and in particular the changes around borrowing for debt for yield investment. There are proposals around commercial investments need to be proportionate to revenue budgets, requirement to assess the affordability of commercial activity within capital strategies, and ensuring that capital expenditure is consistent with corporate objectives. Another area I would like to highlight is the new legislation that's coming in around the Local Government and Elections Act, and what that will finally do is give us the opportunity to make use of the general power of competence in Wales. You may recall that's been in England since the Localism Act of 2011. It's proposed or hoped that will be implemented in November. So that will enable us no longer to just rely on the wellbeing powers, but gives us broader powers in terms of investment opportunities. I'll then go on to talk about risk, and I won't go into all the risks individually. You'll be aware that whenever we have presented a business case to investment committee, we actually go into great detail on the risks, and we also consider exit strategies at the time of acquisition to mitigate risks and to manage risks as they are aware to us at the time. It's fair to say none of us actually forecast the COVID pandemic, but since it's happened, we continue to manage those risks through the risk assessments that are presented to you on a regular basis. In terms of the resource implications, I've already made reference to those in terms of NLP, in that we have met our 209k target on Castlegate and our 400k target on NLP, and I've already talked to you about the return of investment. So unless there is any further detail that you would like me to bring to your attention, I'm quite happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deb. That was a very comprehensive explanation of the report. And so I'm going to see if any members wish at this point to ask any questions. but could I just warn members that they need to remember that they may be in have some confidential information sensitive through commercial purposes, and if you are to be careful, please, not to raise those issues and just keep within the parameters of the report as Deb has explained to us. So Dimitri Petruni, would you like to come in? I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I'm a bit hesitant to talk about anything at the moment. What can I talk about? Can I mention anything in the report, or?
Well, if you stick to the parameters that that Deb has outlined, rather than going into any commercial details of any individual case, I would have thought that that would be sufficient. Though I do say we've got a couple of solicitors, the head of or monitoring officer, I think is on here. So unless there's any further, here we are. To my aid comes the monitoring officer to better explain than I can. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Petruni, I think anything in the report's absolutely fine. And then if there's a question that takes us into a space which is commercially sensitive, then I'm sure either Deb or Pete or whoever's answering the question will be able to advise on the specifics.
Okay, great. Thanks, I'll wait to be told off then, Matt. First question is the report. My understanding was, you know, if this is a moment of reflection, that we were aiming, as I envisaged it, and I thought we had agreed, it was primarily we're going to do about housing. And now I noticed in the background it says 3.1 that we were going to talk about other commercial opportunities or acquire or develop new assets. When you say new assets, does that include housing? Because I think that was the original, or part of the original purpose of this investment committee, of borrowing the money. If I'm wrong on that, or if that's not your view, please let me know. But I'm certain that was what council agreed back then. So just a point on that. On the actual details of the report as well, I'm still struggling to get my head around the figures around Newport Leisure Park, and I'll happy to stop at any point if someone thinks I'm breaching anything. But I can see that Welsh Government, we've got Welsh Government hardship funding, as said in the report. How much for Newport Retail Park? And just can you just disaggregate it for me? The 1% that we're getting on ROI, is that inclusive of the hardship fund receipt from Welsh Government, or exclusive of it? Yeah, just could that be broken down for me? Thank you.
Deb, are you going to come in?
Yep, happy to. In terms of the housing, you're quite right. That is one of the ambitions behind the investment committee and the asset investment policy. Sorry. What this report is doing, though, is actually reflecting on what's happened in the last 12 months. So what I'm actually doing is reflecting on those investments we've already made. You'll be aware, very much so, that we have those ambitions to build, and that as a council, there has already been approval for us to start work and looking at how we can build out our own housing development on the residual land of the former comprehensive school in Caldecott, and that work is ongoing at the moment. We have got a draft output specification. We're just finalising that so that we can start discussions with potential partners, so that then I can bring a report back into Council, Cabinet and Investment Committee to actually discuss the most appropriate method of actually delivering your ambitions on that site, so that we can test proof of concept, and then if possible, if it's financially viable, it's appropriate, and we have the capacity, then we'll look to roll that out. So that's why you won't see it reflected in the report itself, because this is backwards looking, the report, rather than forwards looking. In terms of the ROI, what I've actually done with the ROI is looked at the income proposals that we currently are are operating under in terms of the changes we've had to make to reflect the CVAs that have been agreed and the impact of that on the rent roll. I won't go into any further the details on that given the current environment, but we will be discussing that later on. So that is how the rent roll, the 1.02 has reduced, because it reflects some of those adjustments we've had to make in line with changes. In terms of the actual hardship funding, again, we can go into that later on, but in terms of each individual, but the breakdown is substantial. They have been provided with a breakdown of where we've had rental arrears, and they have agreed in the last quarter to fund all of the applications that we have made for outstanding rent in terms of NLP, which is why we have been able to meet the 400,000 income target for this financial year. I hope that answers the question.
I'm happy to go into it in more detail when it's confidential, but by the sounds of it, we're limited, Chair, so I'm happy to wait.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up at this stage. So just to recap, that is the performance review that is going to go to Audit Committee tomorrow, and it's just been put before us, really just so that we know what is going forward to audit. But I now see that Simon Howarth has his hand up. So Simon, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, I thought I'd put my hand up, and anyway, whatever. A couple of things on the report. I've just flipped through it there, Deb. I only had it this morning, just after lunchtime. A couple of things there. May I ask, could we, within the report, have a breakdown? Sorry, let me put my camera on. Could we have a breakdown of the running costs that it's cost within the two projects, i.e. how much it's cost us security, repairs, etc., and also could we have a breakdown of i.e. The staffing of it as well, i.e. You got yourself, Deb, and who else, and all the time involved in running these portfolios, because at the end of the day, I mean, things have to be paid, don't they, Chair? So I'd like to see them within the report there, going back for the last 12 months, how much it's actually cost us to manage the assets within this portfolios. And the repairs. I mean, how much have we spent during the last 12 months on maintaining these buildings, with the vacant square meterage we've had over a period as well. I mean, they've got to be maintained, and there are other things which have to be paid as well. And I think you said there's about 400k we've claimed back on the COVID fund, but I mean, there are other things there which the authority within the capital side of it. Do they come from capital, or would they be taken from revenue, Chair? Do we know that? These are things that my members of my committee asked me, which I'm sitting on the committee representing for them. So I just like them couple of things. And if we top anything up, does it come from the revenue or does it come from capital monies?
Yeah, fair questions. Thank you.
Thank you,
Deb,
Chair.
again.
Thank you. In terms of the service charge, in terms of the repairs and the cost, they will be funded out of a service charge. So for each asset, a service charge is set up. It is agreed at the start of the year, and that is then paid by each individual tenant on top of their rent. So we determine how much the maintenance will be, we'll determine how much the utility costs will be in terms of NLP, security, etc. And then the tenants pay their proportion of that based on their square footage of the space that they occupy. As an owner, we will pick up those costs of any void units. So the service charge in NLP is quite small, given that they are all responsible for their own buildings, whereas in Castlegate it's a different position because we also provide all of the communal facilities and manage wider areas than we do with NLP. So I could give you more accurate figures, and I think it's a valid point that we could bring that in going forward, but in terms of the cost implications to the authority, they are already built into our figures simply based on void. So as you can see, it makes far more sense to us to have full occupancy, because that reduces and removes any liability for us. And those costs also include the costs of the managing agents who actually do the day-to-day management of the site.
Thank you, Deb. Are there any more questions of Deb?
And Chairman, could I have an answer to the question of the breakdown of how much it costs us in staffing, i.e. we know Debbie, I mean, that was one of my other questions. I think it's prudent that they actually, probably the audit committee can pick that up. So if I can make sure that the audit committee are aware of us asking these questions today for tomorrow, I think that's important as well, because they've got to be managed and people have to be paid to manage all this. Is the cost of doing that, because at the end of the day, the yield return, does that include the running of the management of this, which is us as well? Yeah, I mean, that's just a fair question, Chairman.
It is a fair question. Deb?
So it will, the ROI includes the cost of the service charge, etc., that we are meeting, but it does not include our staff costs, because they are core funded and they have not, we don't identify our costs per project in terms of our management. But it is a fair comment, and perhaps it will be something that we can look at moving forward, because it will not just be my costs, it will be costs of our finance colleagues, our legal colleagues, etc., in all the work that we do on this building.
And clearly you are not able at the moment to bring us all those costs, because you will need to get them from various places. But following up on Councillor Houth's question and request, could we have some of those details back for a later meeting then, please, of this committee?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions before we move on to the next item? No. So that is the item that has been come to us late. And so we move on now from that to the item 5. And from here on, I'm afraid we're going to have to move into committee, because there will be commercially sensitive information given. So I'm going to ask that the meeting move into committee from here. Are you all in favour of that, please?
Yes, no problem, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Okay, we move into committee.